Welcome back to r/Neighbors from Hell, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors. And if you're new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community. And without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled My New Neighbor's Mom. I have new neighbors on my left side. I thought I would be a nice neighbor and go over and introduce myself and give them a plate of cookies. Well, I went over there and an older woman answered the door, looked at me, looked at my plate of cookies and said, "No thank you," and slammed the door in my face. I was a bit stunned but knocked again. This time a younger woman answered the door and greeted me. I told her I lived next door and wanted to welcome them to the neighborhood. She smiled and thanked me and then started yelling at the older woman, who I found out is her mother. The older woman just scoffed and continued doing whatever she was doing. The younger woman thanked me again, took the cookies and said she will talk to her mother. The next day, the older woman comes over, knocks on my door, and when I opened it, she threw my plate inside and said, "Don't ever turn my daughter against me again," and started to walk away, so I yelled out, "You are welcome for the cookies," and closed the door. I could hear my new neighbors arguing and I could hear their dogs barking too. After a few hours, it calmed down over there, so I figured everything would be okay. Let's fast forward to a few days later. My new neighbor's dogs are outside in their fenced-in yard. No big deal, right? Wrong. The older woman comes outside, opens the gates and allows the dogs to roam free as she walks back inside the house. I knew the younger woman was working, but I didn't know where her job was at. I just knew her hours. A few minutes pass by and I can see those dogs tearing up my other neighbor's yard and terrorizing the other neighbor's dog that was inside his fenced-in yard. He comes out, shoos the free dogs away and comforts his dogs. Soon afterwards, the older woman comes out to yell at him and he tells her that there is a leash law and dogs cannot be roaming free. She just scoffed and said she did not care. So he told her, "Fine, guess I will call animal control and the police." And she started to panic and told him he couldn't do that because those were her daughter's dogs, and he said, "I don't care, they should be leashed up or inside their own fenced-in yard, not roaming free. Whatever happens from here is your fault, not your daughter's." And he proceeded to make a couple of phone calls on his cell phone. The older woman picked up a rock and threw it at him, but missed. He was shocked but didn't stop talking to whoever it was he was talking to on the phone. The older woman gathered up the dogs quickly and tried to run to her house, but stopped when she saw me on my porch staring and said loudly, "You got a problem?" I just smiled and waved and she rushed off with the dogs. About 20 minutes later, the police show up and talk to the man that called them, and then they head over to the older woman's house and knock on the door. She doesn't answer, but you can hear the dogs barking inside. They knock again and she still didn't answer the door, so they walked around the house out of my view. When they walked away from view, the older woman opened the door and peeked her head outside. She didn't see them, so she stepped out on her porch and just stood there. The police came back around and saw her and started to walk up to her, but she rushed back inside and tried to close the door, but one of the dogs ran outside to greet the police happily. She wasn't able to just get away that easily, and it made me laugh. They talked to the woman and she started yelling and screaming. The next thing I know is this woman is on the ground and the police are arresting her. I couldn't hear what was being said, but they put her in the back seat and came back up to the house to try to put the dogs back inside and closed the door, which I thought was above and beyond. They could have just left with the older woman. Once they got the door closed, they left what looked to be a business card on the door and went back to the car and drove away. Things were peaceful for many hours after that. Once the younger woman got home, she saw the card, looked around and went inside. Soon afterwards, she came outside and saw me in my garden and asked me if I knew what was going on, so I explained what I witnessed. She then said, "Oh well, guess my mom is gonna have to sit in jail and think about her actions," and she laughed a little. She then went to my neighbor's house to talk to him, and he told her about what happened too and said he was the one that called the police and told her about how her mother threw a rock at him. She seemed horrified. She apologized to him and then told him and myself that her mother is not even supposed to be staying with her, she was only supposed to help her move in. She then said, "I guess I have to call Dad and tell him about Mom's actions," and seemed a little upset. The other neighbor apologized, but she told him he had no reason to apologize, that she did not blame him at all. She told us that she will sort out the problem with her mother and to not worry, that her mother won't give us a problem anymore. She walked back to her house but then turned around and thanked me again for the cookies. She said she loved them, but her mom kept complaining because she's on a diet, and then she laughed about it. I found out later that she did call her father, and her father decided to let his wife spend a night in jail as punishment. I also found out that my new neighbor moved out of her parents' house because of her mother. She said she needed a fresh start. She introduced me to her dogs. Both are boxers and their names are Chip and Dale, which I thought was funny. They love attention, and even though they seem scary when they bark, they are very lovable and playful. I decided to make dog cookies for them when I got home and looked up recipes for dog-friendly cookies that are safe for dogs to eat. After I got the ingredients and made the cookies, which I used a cookie cutter to make them shaped like bones, I brought them over to her. She had a huge laugh and gave them to her dogs. She's a very nice neighbor, and her and I already made a coffee date for the future. The other neighbors likes her too, and so does his wife. She told us her mom is no longer welcome at her home and assured us we won't be seeing her anymore. I guess some parents cannot let go of their adult children. So glad I don't have this problem. She told me her mother was always like this, very entitled, and she is glad her father is level-headed and doesn't put up with her mom's crap. And guys, I don't know what you think about this story, but in my opinion, this woman, the neighbor's mom, is not only entitled, but she might have some sort of mental issues. So that in return kind of makes me feel bad for her, since at the end of the story it does seem like she is kind of left alone now. Anyway, maybe that is just my impression, so please let me know what you think about this story. And the next one is titled, I think my neighbor belongs here. HOAs can be awful, and sometimes they even violate federal law. Don't think so? You might want to continue reading on. This week, a court ordered the Lakewind Condominium Homeowners Association of Aspen Leaf Village to pay $50,000 to a homeowner after the HOA failed to allow her an emotional support dog, a violation of the Fair Housing Act, the U.S. Attorney's Office said on Thursday. This past Tuesday, U.S. District Judge Frederick Raspberry for the District of Colorado ordered a consent order that resolved the years-long dispute between the Lakewind HOA and both John Wayward, a longtime Lakewind owner, and his domestic partner Barbara Mueller over whether Mueller's emotional support dog met the HOA's criteria for reasonable accommodation to its no dogs policy. In addition to paying the $50,000 in compensation to Wayward and Mueller, the 3-year consent order requires the Lakewind HOA board to undergo annual Fair Housing Act training and adopt a new reasonable accommodation policy and guidelines along with an animal assistance policy. Housing providers are required by law to make reasonable accommodations for individuals with service dogs and emotional support dogs, U.S. Attorney Andrew Runn for the District of Colorado said in a news release sent Thursday. We are pleased that this HOA is adopting policies and will conduct training that complies with the Fair Housing Act. These are important protections to ensure that individuals with disabilities have equal housing opportunities. The Lakewind HOA board had no comment on Thursday, as board protocol requires it meet as a whole before issuing any statement, according to a board member. Court documents show that the Lakewind HOA board's violation of the Fair Housing Act started in December 2016, when Wayward and Mueller made a request for Mueller to be granted reasonable accommodation for her emotional support dog. The couple followed federal law and provided the HOA board a letter from a licensed psychologist requesting accommodation for the emotional support dog to assist her with depression and anxiety. The Lakewind HOA board rejected the initial letter submitted in December 2016, a violation of federal law, stating it did not meet legitimate requirements, court documents say. The HOA board requested verification of Mueller's disability and the need for an emotional support animal. From January 2017 to June 2017, Mueller and Wayward continued to apply for reasonable accommodation with the Lakewind HOA, but were unable to get approval from the board. Over the course of the year, they stayed at 5 different residences with friends and relatives and spent more than a week living out of their van so Mueller could keep her emotional support dog and avoid being fined, the complaint says. Mueller and Wayward submitted additional documentation attributed to 2 separate medical providers over the 5 months. The documents described Mueller's depression and anxiety, treatment, and how an emotional support dog could benefit her. The HOA board rejected the additional documents, stating they were too vague or insufficient according to the federal district court complaint. They informed the couple that they had to pay $3,650 in fines or else a lien would be placed on Wayward's unit. After they hired an attorney, the Lakewood HOA board reversed course and granted Wayward and Mueller's request for accommodation after the couple's attorney informed the HOA board that they were preparing to sue in federal district court. Regardless, Wayward and Mueller filed a complaint with the Colorado Civil Rights Division at the end of June 2017. 2 months later, the Lakewood HOA board requested $500 from each condo owner to cover legal costs and potential liability arising from the board's enforcement of the association's no dog rule, court documents state. The charge of discrimination resulted in a civil action complaint filed in U.S. District Court, and the consent order between the court and Lakewood HOA was approved on Tuesday. The Lakewood HOA has now 10 days from the approval date to pay $50,000 in compensation to the couple and 15 days to distribute its new reasonable accommodation and assistance animal policies to Lakewood tenants, and 30 days to notify all homeowners of the lawsuit and to issue an apology to Wayward and Mueller via email. And by the way guys, just in case you might be wondering, I changed the names and the locations of this story because it is a real case and I kinda wanted to protect the identity of the people involved, since usually Reddit is also an anonymous place. And have you ever noticed that HOAs are always so strict when it comes to inhabitants of the HOA adhering to the rules, but then often we hear about HOA board members or presidents that don't give a damn about their own rules. In many cases, they just follow the rules when it is convenient for them, and especially when it is inconvenient for the others. And the next one is titled, I think my neighbor belongs here. So my SO and I moved into a house where it and the neighbors were both up for sale, not realizing that they both hated each other, and this was a factor in both being up. When I moved in, the neighbor, I will call her Karen, next door was friendly, even offered to help us clean our house, which we politely declined. We put up cameras immediately as there was some crime in the area, and we had them before as our places had been broken into previous to moving into this property. Karen did not like that. It caught her dog as she let it out daily to defecate on our lawn twice a day. She would let it out to go, and she would then go back inside her house and call her dog in a few minutes later. I initially picked up the dog waste but quickly got annoyed. Their dog would also pee on the lawn and create giant burn patches, which caused other neighbors to complain, including Karen. So I went to talk to them. I was polite, but they thought it was crazy, anyone would have an issue with this, and as an excuse offered that they had never seen it happen. Yeah, because you purposely go back inside to not see your dog pooping. It just kept happening. So one day I returned their property. They were not happy, but after this they watched their dog and picked up after it if it went on my property, but left it otherwise. My grass also grew back after I reseeded and didn't have any further burn marks. Turned out it was Karen's dog doing that too. They often leave the dog off leash and it causes all kinds of other trouble, but mainly with others. It chases cyclists and nearly causes crashes with them and vehicles when it runs in traffic. It often lunges at other people's dogs and sometimes creates problems as they try and control their dog while this one chases them. It will bark all day at nothing and everything. They can even be right beside it on the deck and they are perfectly happy listening to it bark. Fine, except then their daughter and her friends started throwing rocks at our house and windows. Big rocks. caught on camera, I went over again, spoke to Dad, call him David. He said he would take care of it, and shortly after their daughter came by and apologized with a smirk on her face. Then, out of an abundance of pettiness, they moved in more family and had them always parking their cars in front of our house, leaving the spot in front of theirs open, always. This displeased our guests, but we did nothing. What could we do? Their actions were rude but legal. This continued for a month until my SO suggested that maybe I was cynical and that it wasn't being done on purpose to be disrespectful. She then put a note saying something to the effect of, if you could park when possible in front of your own address instead of ours, it would be greatly appreciated as it displaces our guests. This went over about as well as you can imagine. Karen, immediately upon hearing about the note, parked her normally garage-kept car half in front of her driveway and half in front of our grass, to ensure our guests were still displaced, but to make a point and also just to show extreme childish levels of maturity. When my SO left the house to check the mail, Karen, who had now had her car parked for hours with her and her daughter taking turns to watch for either of us, made a beeline for my SO and aggressively and vaguely threatened her by saying we would be neighbors for a long time, and asking her repeatedly with chest puffed out, "So this is how it's gonna be?" She also made sure we knew that she had called the city and told her that we didn't own the street. And yep, no kidding Karen, not at all what the note said. The next day our guests parked in front of our house. Karen went to their car and started to film them up close and became aggressive. These people were confused as to why someone was being so confrontational. If Karen and her kin cannot park there, nobody can. We later got a call about this and confirmed it on our house cameras. The police were called and attended. Karen pretended she wasn't home. The police left and, seeing her chance, so did Karen. The police returned later, spoke to someone at the house and left a message for Karen to call them. Today, Karen approached my SO and me with a note to tell us that she didn't want our guests throwing their vegan food in her garbage anymore. That is great, except this never happened. After checking the cameras, I let Karen know. She became angry and started taking pictures of the property, us and who knows what else. Now there's only to wait and see what tomorrow brings us. And guys, if you have watched until here and if you have ever had any awful neighbors like the ones in our stories, please don't forget to post some star emojis in the comments if you want to support my channel. Thank you so much in advance. And in addition, please don't forget, if you have any interesting stories to share of your own, then head on over to r/ripe stories on Reddit to share your own story there. And the next one is not a neighbor story, but instead it is a little bonus story from r/ripe stories. And just to give you a little warning in advance, this story might be offensive to some of you. It is titled My Uncle's Military Story. And sorry guys, by the way, I forgot to mention, the first story in today's video was posted by user Stacy Rose as me on our own subreddit, and this story is posted by user Heart of Dreams, also from our own subreddit. Anyway, hey Ripe, I have a couple secondhand stories about my family that I feel you and your followers might approve of, as I tend to ramble. Apologies in advance. I have many aunts and uncles, about 5 on each side, but the one I want to talk about today is my now deceased Uncle Brian. He passed away to cancer when I was very young, so I mostly only know him by my mother's rambling. My uncle grew up to a poor family in the greater Las Vegas area. Grandparents were ex-military and his brothers loved to play pranks. However, of all of them, Uncle Brian was, as mom put it, a mean little man. If 5 guys jumped him with knives, they better pray they keep their grip, because they are going to need them. My somewhat naive grandma believed his excuses when he came home bloody, but not grandpa. How far these fights went is not clear, but what was clear was that he came home looking rough a lot. Fed up grandpa finally told Uncle Brian it was military or jail. He chose military. He was then part of the deployment to Desert Storm. And the following is why I have always believed my uncle was a good man and regularly liked to joke that he became my guardian angel. A journalist contacted grandma one day during his duty, claiming to have a story they were planning to run, I think it was Times magazine, about my uncle. We never did find the article, so by now it is only hearsay, but I like the version I am now about to tell. For those with weak stomachs, this is your trigger warning. My uncle was part of the foot soldiers who had to enter and clear villages. They often found them empty or full of the dead. In one village, however, they found something worse. In a basement tied to a post were 2 young children. Both were miraculously alive. No one in the unit could speak their language, and the unit, now several days in, were on the low side of their supplies. My uncle, from what I gather against us army Rex, became these children's caretaker, and his fellow soldiers split their dwindling supplies to feed these 2 lost children for several days, until they were able to drop them off at the Red Cross station. The reporter who called Grandma apparently got the story from said Red Cross station. My uncle to this day remains my hero for this. Why was the story never in the magazine? We can think of several reasons, but I wish I had it, if only for proof. And by the way guys, just for your interest, I had to censor one part of the story because it was a little bit too graphic for YouTube. However, basically they did not only find the children in that basement, but also their parents who died. And I guess that is why OP's uncle became the caretaker for these children. And guys, unfortunately we have already reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, I would suggest to check out my endless playlist, which you will now see linked on the screen, which will provide you thousands of hours of my awesome content. In addition, if you still cannot get enough, I would suggest to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/ripeyoutube, where you will not only find exclusive Reddit content, and for $3 a month you will get early access to all my daily videos, and you will be included in the name list at the end of each video. However, please don't feel pressured into giving me money or anything. I am already incredibly grateful that you watch my videos daily. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.